Thank you very much. Yeah, my name's David White. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of what we're saying here is the world's leading web extraction platform. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of what web extraction is, why data from the web is actually, I believe, the new frontier and certainly the new battleground for the data advantage that businesses are trying to gain. So if we start off by sort of saying what we do, very simply, we take websites which are messy, unstructured, horrible things, written in HTML and God knows what else, and we make them clean data. We make them what we call process-ready data. So if you're a data analyst or a data science, we give you data you can actually work with from the web. Now, I'm going to show you a quick video. And it's quick because what we do is very speedy and quick, and it's also, I think, been speeded up a little bit of how that works. So this example is very simple. There is a website where the one we're using an example here is IKEA. IKEA sell lots of things, and obviously there's lots of data about the things they sell, whether it be the price, the dimensions, the name of the product, its stock levels, etc. So if you wanted to use this data to do some processing, maybe you're interested in how much chairs cost on average or the trend of chair pricing for IKEA, you'd need to be able to get the data off there and use it. So hopefully this video will play. So we're going to put a URL in. Our system's then going to what we call machine read the website, and you can see it's turned it into lovely data, and it's going quick, which is also a good demo. And then you can see it's now produced what is in effect a JSON API, which you can call using a REST call for those of you of a more technical mind. So that's what we mean by taking or extracting data from the web. We take messy websites and we make them things you can use. So why do we do this? Or why did I start doing this? Very simply, I was formerly head of technology innovation for the Royal Bank of Scotland. So on the previous panel, I probably would have been one of the people getting bashed about being a banker and not innovating enough. And we had a number of data challenges in RBS, obviously, because we got bailed out for 80 billion. One of them was around risk and how we made decisions using data on particularly corporate lending. And in this process, I began to realize that while we had huge amounts of data, and RBS had a lot of data, we didn't have all the data. Using our current terminology, I would say that our data landscape was incomplete. There were critical pieces of information which weren't in the models. And we discovered this because the models would say, do a deal, and a clever credit guy would go, nah, I'm not going to do that deal. And we started to realize the reason for that is that humans could read the web and could look at and say, well, actually, there's a lot of stuff going on about this company. They're currently involved in litigation. I don't really want to get involved with them. So that really started a journey, which now for me has been a sort of 7-8 year journey of trying to find ways to help businesses make better decisions by completing their data landscape, by giving them all the data they need from the web. So why do we like the web as a data source? It's got some pretty good words here. So it's big, and it's really big. You know, when we talk about big data, I think in the last 12 months we've processed 50 petabytes of data from the web. So there's a lot out there. It's free. You don't have to pay for the data. All the data we use is not subject to copyright or database provisions. It's typically what would be described as facts, and it's public information. As such, you're not having to pay somebody to gather it. And most importantly, when we start to think about some of the critical things such as data quality, one of the great things about the web is it tends to be kept up to date. I'll talk later about some examples, but one data area we deal with a lot is location. And if you're a store, you're going to make sure on your website you have your current location and it's up to date. So we think it's a good source of data. And as such, as a user of that data, you can get comprehensive data that's cheap and timely, which you would think is the ideal source. So why isn't this being done much more? Why isn't web data a critical part of every company's data landscape? The slight issue is it's harder than it seems. And earlier there was a discussion on sort of founder experiences. The one thing I would say as a founder that was a critical lesson for me is you've got to be naive about your problem to start a company. Because if I'd realized how hard this was, I probably never would have started. But fortunately, I was naive enough to start the journey. So just to sort of further evidence the point of it being difficult, I think there was an article that was in the New York Times, but I've also seen this mentioned in Harvard Business Review, etc., that data scientists, the people that are often consuming this data, actually spend 50 to 80% of their time collecting and pre-processing. So these guys, and any of you out there that actually employ data scientists and are now paying them probably quite obscene wages, most of what they're doing for you is not data science. Most of what they're doing for you is gathering data. And that's probably not a good use of their time. Now, if we look at why they're spending so much time doing this, it's because fundamentally the kind of traditional way, the way that most people have deployed in trying to gather data from the web, involves a thing called a scraper. Now, it's a horrible sounding thing, and any of you who've had to write one will know it's actually a horrible thing to do. Scrapers are hugely inefficient, and the reason for that is very simply, when you write a scraper, you, as a developer, visually and at HTML level, inspect the site, and you write a piece of code to extract data from it. That sounds great. The only problem with this is websites change all the time, and as such, your ability to continue to pull data from that website requires constant maintenance. And this is the drawback of scrapers. So we decided there was a need for a faster and easier way to source that data. And fundamentally, it would need a completely different approach. So we started Import.io 3 years ago now. We are based out of London and San Francisco, and there's around about 40 of us now. It's growing very quickly. And our fundamental purpose is to make data from the web accessible. We believe very firmly in data democracy, that we want to reduce the technical barrier and reduce the hurdles to unlocking this massive data set that is the web. So how do we do that? Fundamentally, we do something called machine reading, and that's quite a broad term, but what it means is we have a bunch of algorithms that are able to ingest a website, to read it, hopefully replicating what a human would see from the points of view of relevant data, and then push that out as the terminology we use is a process-ready data set. So really be able to ingest websites and then push out, fundamentally an API that you can then use within your environment. And the reason why we do that is so you don't have to. Now, that's the concepts of the business and some of the ideas behind it. Let's talk about some real-world examples of this. So, I'm very much the business end of Import.io. I haven't written any of the algorithms, which is probably why they work. But the thing that fascinates me about this business is the possibilities. And that's principally driven by the fact the web is so diverse. One of the amazing things about the web is if you can think of a topic and you can think of how you might attribute that topic into tabular format, so in other words, turn it into data, there is probably a website out there with that information on there, and using our technology, you could get a live feed to it and make decisions from it. As such, we see quite significantly diverse uses of our technology, ranging from, I believe there is an art installation in Barcelona that every time there is a death by gunshot in the States rings a bell, through to some of the largest companies in the world using it to make critical business decisions. I'm just going to cover a few of the primary use cases we see today and some of the real interesting data frontiers we see people working in. So the first one, and it's a kind of very much on topic at the moment, is that analyzing of surroundings. And what we mean by this is mapping things, putting a physical location on a map using some form of geolocation and putting metadata around it. Now, this is a tricky data set for a number of different reasons. First of all, there aren't standards. that are global. So the way you might describe an address here in Dublin is probably very different to how you might describe an address in US, and certainly very different to how you might describe an address in Vietnam. So as such, you've always got to be able to read the page the way a human does, and you can't apply standard heuristics. You even get down to silly things like how somebody uses the word street, which can be used in many different ways in many different languages. So one of the use cases we have, and we supply a number of some of the world's biggest mapping companies, is basically trying to put retail locations on maps and make sure the metadata around them, such as opening times and maybe facilities, etc., is up to date. And we do that by essentially going to the original source, which is most retailers have a website. On their website, they are likely to describe where they are and when they're open, and we pull that from the original source. Now, we do that at least once a day, sometimes more, which means that the map provider can feel very confident about putting a location to say there is using the US example, because it's right now in my office, a Walgreens on the corner of 9th and 10th, 9th and Market in San Francisco. And they can do that because they know it's from the original source, and if Walgreens say it's there, they can probably safely put it there. It's a very interesting data frontier at the moment around location, really trying to bring maps products and people that use that geolocation to life. So moving on, and this is another area where I see a huge amount of innovations from company at the moment, which is pricing models. So I think long gone are the days when you could, for example, be a book publisher and price your book once and then forget about it. Today we work in an environment driven principally by the pioneers of sort of dynamic pricing, such as Amazon, where price is highly dynamic and in many cases can change multiple times in a day if the e-commerce retailer chooses to do so. So how do you deal with that if you're a manufacturer? How do you deal with the fact that you might have channel partners, or you might be wishing to keep your price within a certain range with multiple online retailers? And this is another use case we do a lot. So we mine millions, hundreds of millions of prices from the web and make that available to various different manufacturers, whether it be books, book publishers, manufacturers of physical goods such as OEM hard disks, etc., so they can better be able to react to price changes, but also predict the trend of price and respond to that as product managers. So moving on, ultimate A/B testing. This is an interesting one, and one that I've been following for a little while now. Those of you, and it was discussed in the previous one, would understand that sort of traditional A/B testing is I change my website, I run an A test that maybe has a button in red, and I run a B test that has a button in blue. And that's great, well-trodden path, and multivariate testing, etc., is proven to increase your return on your site. But there is an assumption there that the person wishing to buy is only visiting your site. One of the fascinating use cases we have is a very large, and we've got a few in this domain, online auction site that is actually doing A/B testing against their competitors and trying to understand changes on their competitors' sites versus changes on their sites and how it can drive different behavior in making a user choose their site versus their competitors. And again, a very interesting data frontier of taking that well-trodden path of sort of A/B testing and doing something new with it. And the final example I've given is, again, quite a common one in some respects, but really trying to understand what your customers are really thinking. And we have a number of customers that really want to understand reviews from customers as manufacturers, not as the online retailer, etc. And their challenge is their reviews can be over any site that sells their product, and really trying to get an accurate view of that landscape can be very difficult. Also, relating sort of reviews to other attributes around the sale, such as price, etc. So, in my experience, this is very much the tip of the iceberg. This is, we see thousands of different use cases for the product, and we have some really fascinating customers we're working with at the moment who are trying to put web data as a core part of their data landscape. And we're a big believer in the fact that innovation comes from experimentation. And not just from a point of view of our paying customers, but the data community as a whole. And as such, the large majority of our tools are free. So if you go onto our website, the demo I did at the start is actually a free tool. Anybody who has a URL and wants to get an API out of it in order to integrate it into a spreadsheet or a model can use that tool for free. We also have a more advanced data extraction tool that is actually a download that, again, is free. And the way that we use this information, because obviously it's free at point of consumption, we have to pay to develop it, is all of the activity of the community actually informs our core machine and deep learning algorithm. Because every time you use the tool to describe a website, it gives us that semantic description of what a human thinks is the data on that page, and that drives our underlying algorithmic approach to the problem space. I'm a firm believer that data asymmetry is a problem. There are data haves and have-nots at the moment, and that's why we're absolutely committed to continue to make our tools free and to encourage the community to mine the web and use that data to produce interesting results. I'm just going to pick up on something somebody said before, just a little bit of a bursting bubble here. Data unicorns don't exist. If your data scientists are spending 50 to 80% of their time mining data, it's because they're not very good at it. It's a specialized area, and as such, you really want to work with the experts in web data who do this day in, day out. Just to give you an idea of scale, these numbers are a little bit approximate these days, but we've probably pulled over 100 billion data points from 800,000 websites. So, as I said, around 50 petabytes of data so far this year. And in my last 2 minutes, I'm just going to close here. Data is essential. I mean, I'm sort of preaching to the choir a little bit here, since obviously this conference is a data conference. But the reality is, if you want to be competitive in this market, you have to be data-driven. I believe one of the figures at the moment is the average spend for a large business is going to be 8 million per annum this year on data-related projects. So I think that message is getting across, but it's not an exaggeration to say if you're not data competitive, then that means you're data uncompetitive, and your chances of survival will be severely limited. With that in mind, the web is the ultimate source of data. Just from a size and diversity point of view, you will not find a better source of data, and we believe if you do the right things with it, you're also dealing with one of the highest quality sources of data as well. As I said, I believe that web data is the new frontier. The people we see really exploiting that data domain are companies that are getting measurable competitive advantage in their sector. So if web data is not part of your data landscape today, we would argue it really should be, and you should be using it. So thank you very much for your time. My name is David White from Import.io. Thank you.